There is a common lazy assumption that if someone has a small social circle, they must be quote unquote socially awkward or simply don't know how to make friends. When people look at an empath who spends a lot of time alone, they label it as a failure of personality. They assume the empath is struggling to fit in or lacks the necessary quote unquote people skills to maintain a large group of acquaintances. But this couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, the empath isn't struggling to connect. They are operating on a frequency that most people haven't even discovered yet. While the average person is busy listening to words, the empath is busy processing the raw data behind those words. They are reading the slight shift in your tone, the tension in your jaw, the micro expressions that flash across your face for a split second, and the massive glaring gap between what you are saying and what you are actually feeling. To an empath, walking into a room full of people isn't just a social event. It's an intake of massive amounts of hidden information. They see the mask everyone wears. They see the person who is smiling but is actually drowning in insecurity. And they feel the person who is acting confident but is actually radiating hidden aggression. When you have that level of perception, surface-level interaction doesn't just feel boring, it feels fundamentally dishonest. It's like being the only sober person in a room full of people pretending to be drunk. You see the strings, you see the performance, and you see the artificiality of it all. This is why small talk is so exhausting for them. To most, small talk is a safe way to pass the time. To an empath, it's a disorienting performance where everyone has silently agreed to stay in the shallow end of the pool, even though the ocean is right there. This constant awareness eventually forces the empath to a crossroads. They reach a point where they have to make a definitive choice. Do they keep forcing themselves to participate in these shallow, empty interactions just to maintain the appearance of being social? Or do they step back and wait for something real? Most eventually choose to step back. From the outside, this looks like withdrawal, isolation, or even a sudden loss of friends. People might say they become antisocial or that they're going through a phase. But on the inside, this isn't driven by fear or a lack of ability. It is driven by high-level discernment. They aren't retreating because they're afraid of people. They're retreating because they are no longer willing to settle for the filler relationships that occupy most people's lives. The truth is that empaths aren't looking for more conversations. They are looking for honest ones. They aren't interested in being popular or surrounded by a crowd of people who don't actually see them. They are interested in being understood. Once an empath realizes how rare true authenticity actually is, their standards for who they allow into their inner circle rise dramatically. This is exactly where the social circle starts to shrink. It's not because people are rejecting them. It's because the empath is quietly, intentionally opting out of interactions that don't meet a certain level of depth. They stop laughing at jokes that aren't funny. They stop pretending to be interested in gossip. They stop investing their precious energy into dynamics that feel one-dimensional and draining. You have to understand that this shrinking circle isn't a loss. It's a rigorous filtration process. The empath isn't becoming less social. They are becoming more precise. They are moving from a quantity mindset to a quality mindset. They would rather have 2 genuine high-level connections than 50 surface-level acquaintances who only know the version of them that wears a mask. By opting out of the noise, they are making room for connections that actually provide nourishment instead of just taking up time. When you see an empath standing alone, don't pity them. They aren't failing at social life. They are succeeding at protecting their integrity. They have finally realized that being alone is much less lonely than being surrounded by people who don't have the capacity to meet them at the level they live on. When we talk about the cost of connection for an empath, We aren't talking about something abstract or metaphorical. We are talking about a literal physical expense that their body pays every time they step into a social setting. Most people can walk into a crowded room, have a few conversations, and walk out feeling more or less like themselves. They regulate their emotions internally. They have a buffer that keeps other people's moods from leaking into their own system. But for an empath, that buffer doesn't exist. Their nervous system is wired differently. It acts like a biological mirror that automatically reflects the emotional environment around them. This isn't a choice or a personality trait. It is a physiological reality. If you are sitting across from someone who is deeply anxious, your body doesn't just notice it. Your own heart rate begins to climb. Your muscles begin to tighten, and your breathing becomes shallow. You are literally experiencing their stress as if it were your own. This is why social interaction for an empath is incredibly expensive. Every person they interact with represents a new set of data that their nervous system has to process and manage. If they are around people who are manipulative, chaotic, or carrying heavy, unresolved baggage, the empath's body registers that noise as a direct threat. They are absorbing the static of everyone else's internal lives. While others might leave a party feeling energized by the music and the crowd, the empath leaves feeling completely depleted. It's not the normal kind of tired that you can fix with a good night's sleep. It is a deep cellular exhaustion that comes from having your internal equilibrium hijacked for hours. It feels like someone reached into your gas tank and siphoned out every drop of fuel, leaving you to run on empty for days just to recover from a single evening of having fun. As an empath matures, they start to recognize this pattern, and they stop looking at relationships through the lens of friendship or obligation. Instead, they start looking at them through the lens of cost. They realize that they have a limited amount of emotional currency to spend, and they can no longer afford to waste it on people who leave them feeling worse than when they started. They stop asking themselves, how can I make this friendship work? Or why don't I fit in? And they start asking a much more direct question. What is this interaction costing me? They realize that if a specific person consistently leaves them feeling drained, foggy, or anxious, that person is a liability to their health. This is the moment the empath shifts from being a people pleaser to being a peace protector. They begin to prioritize their internal stability over social volume because they've learned the hard way that you cannot pour from an empty cup. Eventually, this realization leads to a total overhaul of how the empath lives their life. They start declining invitations, limiting their phone time, and being much more selective about who they allow into their personal space. To an outsider, this can look cold or mean, but it is actually a necessary act of survival. Protecting your peace isn't about being better than anyone else. It's about recognizing that your body literally cannot handle the constant interference of other people's chaos. For an empath, solitude isn't a luxury, it's medicine. It's the only time their nervous system can finally settle down, stop mirroring the world, and return to its natural baseline. They learn that fitting in isn't worth the price of losing their own sanity. They would rather have a life that is small and stable than a life that is large and constantly vibrating with someone else's unresolved energy. This shift in perspective is the ultimate turning point, where the empath finally stops apologizing for their needs and starts honoring them. The most dangerous trait an empath possesses is their ability to see the why behind everyone's bad behavior. Because you can feel the hidden trauma, the childhood wounds, and the deep-seated pain that drives people to lash out or shut down, you end up developing a dangerously high tolerance for mistreatment. You become an expert at rationalizing away the ways people hurt you. You tell yourself, they only snapped at me because they're stressed, or they're being selfish because they never felt loved as a child. You provide the context that they refuse to provide for themselves. While this level of insight is a superpower in terms of human understanding, it becomes a trap in terms of self-preservation. You end up confusing understanding someone with excusing them. You think that because you can see the root of their poison, you are somehow obligated to stay and drink it. For years, this pattern forces you into a cycle of chronic overextension. You become the person who listens longer, forgives faster, and carries the emotional weight of two people in a one-person relationship. You step in to stabilize their moods, you anticipate their needs before they even speak, and you offer endless patience while receiving none in return. You convince yourself that if you just give a little more, or if you explain things a little more clearly, they will eventually reach your level of awareness and meet you there. But the harsh reality that most empaths eventually face is that many people aren't looking for a partner or a friend. They are looking for a shock absorber. They are perfectly happy to let you carry their burden because it's easier for them. And as long as you keep offering your energy for free, they will keep taking it without ever feeling the need to change. The breaking point arrives when the exhaustion finally outweighs the hope. You reach a stage where you realize the connection isn't just imbalanced, it's entirely one-sided. You've been building a bridge from your side for years, only to realize the other person hasn't even laid a single brick. When an empath finally wakes up to this, they do something that feels radical to everyone around them. They stop overgiving. They stop the constant check-ins, the unsolicited emotional support, and the endless excuses. They set a boundary that says, I understand why you are the way you are, but I am no longer willing to be the victim of it. This is the moment the structure of the relationship is tested, and more often than not, it completely collapses. Without the empath's constant effort to prop the connection up, it falls apart because there was never anything solid holding it together from the other side. This collapse is a painful but necessary exposure. It reveals the uncomfortable truth about your social circle. It shows you exactly who was there for you and who was only there for the benefits you provided. When you stop being easy and accommodating, the people who were only using you for emotional labor will suddenly disappear, or worse, they will call you cold or selfish because you are no longer serving their needs. But you haven't become colder, you've become more precise. You've realized that your empathy is a finite resource and that giving it to people who don't respect it is an act of self-abandonment. You stop being a fixer and start being a truth teller. You reach a level of maturity where you would genuinely rather be alone in your truth than surrounded by people who only love the version of you that carries their weight. You realize that a smaller, honest circle is infinitely more valuable than a crowded room full of conditional connections. The ultimate evolution of an empath occurs when they finally stop asking, how can I make them like me? And start asking, does this connection actually serve my peace? For the longest time, you likely operated within the standard social framework, the one that says having more friends, being invited to more events, and being liked by everyone is the ultimate goal. Most people spend their entire lives on a treadmill of seeking external validation, constantly adjusting their personality, swallowing their truths, and tolerating uncomfortable environments just to maintain a sense of belonging. But for the empath, this trade-off eventually becomes unbearable. You realize that every time you choose acceptance over your own intuition, you are paying for it with your mental health. You begin to see that the hollow feeling you get after a night of forced socializing isn't just boredom. It is the sound of your internal alignment breaking. The breakthrough happens when you realize that being alone is not the same thing as being lonely. In fact, being alone is often the only time you actually feel like yourself. You discover that being surrounded by the wrong people, those who are shallow, judgmental, or emotionally chaotic, is infinitely more draining and isolating than sitting in a quiet room by yourself. This is the moment you stop seeking validation from people who don't even see the real you and start seeking coherence. Coherence is that rare, steady feeling where your external life finally matches your internal truth. It's the peace that comes when you no longer have to perform, mask, or pretend to be interested in things that feel empty. You realize that your energy is a sacred resource, and the price of fitting in has become way too high to keep paying. By choosing internal alignment over external approval, you begin to build a life that looks very different to the outside world. To others, your life might start to look quiet or even small. People who are still stuck in the approval-seeking loop might think you become distant or that you've lost your spark. But they are looking at the surface, while you are experiencing the depth. On the inside, your life doesn't feel small. It feels steady, grounded, and incredibly clear. You are no longer a leaf blowing in the wind, reacting to whatever social invitation or external pressure comes your way. Instead, you become the anchor. You stop saying yes out of habit or guilt and start responding only to what is genuinely aligned with your peace. If an environment feels loud, chaotic, or fake, you simply don't go. If a conversation feels draining, you gracefully exit. You are no longer available for anything that compromises your baseline of calm. This is where the narrative shifts from losing friends to refining your circle. You aren't losing people, you are filtering for quality. You are clearing out the noise so you can finally hear your own voice. When you stop chasing connection for the sake of connection, you make room for the few, rare relationships that actually provide mutual resonance. Your circle isn't empty, it's curated. It's made up of people who don't require you to shrink yourself or perform a character just to be accepted. You reach a point of such high self-respect that you would rather have 0 plans on a Friday night than one plan that leaves you feeling spiritually bankrupt. This isn't isolation, it's the ultimate form of control. You have realized that protecting your state of mind is the single most important job you have. And once you taste the freedom of living in alignment, there is absolutely no incentive to ever go back to the way things were. At the end of the day, being an empath isn't a social disability, it's a high-level filtering system. While the world may try to convince you that your small circle is a sign of failure, you now know it is actually your greatest success. You have done the hard work of auditing your life, identifying the emotional costs, and deciding that your peace is non-negotiable. You've moved past the need for a crowded room and stepped into the power of a clear mind. You are no longer fitting in because you were never meant to fit into spaces that require you to shrink. You were meant to live with depth, and that depth requires a foundation of truth rather than a mountain of acquaintances. Choosing this path is an act of courage. It means accepting that you will be misunderstood by those who still prioritize popularity over peace, and that's okay. Their misunderstanding is the price of your freedom. By honoring your sensitivity instead of fighting it, you transform from a victim of your environment into the master of it. You aren't retreating from life. You are finally living it on your own terms. The weight you used to carry for others has been dropped, and in its place, you found a steady, unshakable sense of self that no amount of social noise can disrupt. You are selective, you are intentional, and you are finally free.